Some places don't make it into the history books. Stone warriors buried in fields stretching beyond the horizon. Walls built by people, history forgot. Pyramids older than Egypt, standing in deserts no one talks about. These aren't legends. They were found, documented, and then quietly forgotten. But tonight, we're bringing them back. If you enjoy sinking into ancient mysteries, they say you'll have incredible luck if you like, and subscribe before this video ends. Because what you're about to hear might keep you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Inside the ancient world of Karnak tumulus, along the quiet coastline of Brittany in western France, where cold winds move across open fields and early morning fog settles low over ancient stone monuments, there rises a massive earthen mound that has watched over this land for more than 6,000 years. This is the Karnak tumulus, also known as the Saint-Michel tumulus, one of the largest and oldest prehistoric burial monuments in Europe, built by communities who lived long before writing, kingdoms, or recorded history. At first glance it looks like a natural hill, a gentle rise in the landscape, grass covering its slopes, stones barely visible beneath the surface. But this is no natural formation. Every layer of soil, every stone, and every chamber inside was placed here by human hands, through years of collective labour and deep cultural belief. The tumulus stands near the famous Karnak standing stones, creating one of the most extraordinary prehistoric landscapes in the world, where thousands of monuments were built by people whose names, languages, and faces have been lost to time. Together, these structures form what many researchers believe was once a powerful spiritual and ceremonial centre for Neolithic societies. The Saint-Michel tumulus was constructed around 4500 BCE, making it older than the Egyptian pyramids and older than Stonehenge. At a time when most people in the world lived in small farming villages, the builders of Karnak were already organising massive construction projects that required long-term planning, leadership, and cooperation. The mound stretches more than 120 metres in length and rises over 10 metres high, containing millions of kilograms of earth and stone. Inside, hidden from view, are carefully built stone chambers that once held the remains of elite individuals and valuable ritual objects. These chambers were not meant for ordinary people. They were reserved for leaders, priests, warriors, or powerful families who held special status within society. Archaeologists have discovered polished stone axes, jade ornaments, beads, and ceremonial objects inside the tomb, many made from materials brought from hundreds of kilometers away. This shows that the people buried here were connected to long-distance trade networks and controlled valuable resources. They were not isolated farmers. They were members of an organized and influential culture. The construction of the tumulus itself was a massive undertaking. Without metal tools, wheels, or animals for heavy transport, workers had to quarry stones by hand, dig soil with simple tools, carry loads in baskets, and carefully assemble chambers using precision and experience. Thousands of people likely worked together over decades to complete the monument. This level of effort tells us something important. For these communities, honouring the dead was not a minor ritual. It was central to their identity, their power structure, and their understanding of life and death. The tumulus was not just a grave, it was a symbol, a marker of authority, a reminder that certain individuals continued to hold influence even after death. Some researchers believe that the people buried here were seen as guardians, ancestors, or spiritual protectors, whose presence strengthened the community and protected the land. This is why many historians describe Karnak as a burial field of stone warriors, not in the sense of soldiers with weapons, but as powerful figures whose legacy was preserved through monumental architecture. Around the tumulus, thousands of standing stones were erected in long rows and patterns. Although their exact purpose remains debated, many scholars believe they were connected to rituals, astronomy, seasonal cycles, and ancestor worship. Together with the burial mounds, they formed a sacred landscape where ceremonies, gatherings, and pilgrimages likely took place for generations. People may have travelled long distances to participate in festivals, funerals, and spiritual events centered around these monuments. The placement of the tumulus was also carefully chosen. It sits on elevated ground overlooking surrounding fields and waterways, making it visible from far away. This visibility was intentional. It reminded everyone who passed through the region that this land was protected by powerful ancestors and ancient traditions. In many early societies, control over burial sites meant control over territory. By building such a massive tomb here, the community was claiming this region as their spiritual and cultural homeland. Inside the chambers, the arrangement of stones shows remarkable engineering skill. Walls were fitted tightly, roofs were supported by massive slabs, drainage was carefully managed to prevent collapse. Some sections were sealed and reopened multiple times, suggesting that burials occurred over many generations. This means the tumulus was not a one-time project. It was a living monument, constantly renewed by the community. Over time, as new cultures arrived in the region, the original meaning of Karnak began to fade. Celtic tribes, Roman settlers, medieval farmers, and modern townspeople all lived near the site, often unaware of its true age and significance. Stones were sometimes removed. Earth was disturbed, parts of the monument were damaged, yet the core structure survived. In the 19th century, systematic archaeological studies finally revealed the true scale and importance of the tumulus. Researchers realized that this was not just a local grave, but one of Europe's earliest large ceremonial centers. It proved that complex social systems existed in Western Europe thousands of years earlier than previously believed. Today the Karnak tumulus is protected, but it remains vulnerable. Weather erodes its slopes, tourism creates pressure, time continues its slow work. Without careful conservation, parts of this ancient story could disappear forever. Walking around the site now is a quiet and powerful experience. There are no towering buildings, no bright signs, no crowds, only open fields, scattered stones, and the massive silent mound rising from the earth. Yet beneath that silence lies the memory of thousands of people who worked, believed, struggled, and dreamed here more than 6 millennia ago. The burial fields of Karnak remind us that human civilization did not begin with kings and empires. It began with communities who learned to organize, cooperate, and give meaning to life through shared memory and ritual. They turned soil into monuments. They turned death into legacy. They turned ordinary land into sacred space. And even today, long after their names have vanished, their stones still stand, watching, remembering, waiting to be understood, inside the forgotten world of Thimlich Ohinga. In the rolling hills of western Kenya, near the shores of Lake Victoria, where clouds often drift low across open grasslands, and the wind moves quietly through scattered trees, there stands a massive stone enclosure that tells the story of a forgotten African civilization. This place is known as Thimlich Ohinga, which in the local Doloa language means the frightening dense forest, a name that reflects both the landscape that once surrounded it and the sense of mystery that still surrounds its origins. At first glance, the site appears like a maze of stone walls rising from the earth, twisting and curving across the hilltop in patterns that seem almost natural, yet every stone was placed deliberately, without cement, without mortar, and without modern tools. These walls were built entirely through dry stone construction, where rocks are carefully balanced and fitted together using skill, experience, and patience, creating structures strong enough to survive for centuries. Some of the walls reach heights of more than 4 meters, and are several meters thick, forming a powerful defensive system that once protected the people who lived inside. Walking through Thimlich Ohinga today feels like entering a silent fortress. Narrow passageways lead into wide courtyards, small openings open into enclosed compounds. Hidden corners suggest private living spaces. Everything is designed for control, security, and community life. Archaeological studies indicate that Thimlich Ohinga was built between the 15th and 19th centuries, during a period of intense social change in East Africa, when communities faced conflicts over land, cattle, water, and trade routes. This was a time when population growth, migration, and competition forced many groups to strengthen their settlements. The builders of Thimlich Ohinga were likely ancestors of the Luo people, who migrated into the region from the north and established powerful clan-based societies. These communities depended on farming, fishing, and cattle herding, and their wealth was closely tied to land and livestock. Protecting these resources was essential for survival. The stone walls were not only defensive barriers, they were also social boundaries. Inside the enclosure, families lived according to strict traditions. Certain areas were reserved for elders, others for warriors, some for ceremonies, some for daily life. The layout reflects a society where age, status, and responsibility shaped every aspect of existence. Constructing Thimlich Ohinga required enormous collective effort. Stones had to be gathered from surrounding areas. They had to be selected for size and shape. They had to be carried uphill, then fitted carefully, one by one, without breaking balance. This process demanded cooperation and leadership and long-term planning. It shows that the community possessed advanced organizational skills and deep knowledge of engineering, even without formal education systems or written manuals. One of the most remarkable features of Thimlich Ohinga is how well the walls have survived. Despite centuries of rain, wind, heat, and human activity, many sections remain standing, proving the effectiveness of traditional African stone building techniques. Modern engineers studying the site have noted that the walls naturally absorb stress and shift slightly over time, preventing major collapse. This flexible strength is something modern construction often struggles to achieve. Life inside the stone settlement was carefully regulated. Homes made of mud and wood once stood inside the enclosures. Food was stored in protected areas. Livestock was kept within secure zones at night. During times of danger, families could retreat behind the walls, turning the settlement into a powerful refuge. Oral traditions suggest that Thimlich Ohinga was not only a fortress but also a political centre where clan leaders met, disputes were resolved and alliances were formed. It was a place of authority where decisions affecting entire communities were made. Religion and spirituality were also central to life here. Sacred spaces inside the enclosure were used for rituals, honouring ancestors and natural forces. In many African belief systems, ancestors continue to guide and protect the living. By building strong settlements, people believed they were honouring both the past and the future. The walls were not just physical protection, they were spiritual protection. Over time, however, the world around Thimlich Ohinga began to change. Colonial expansion, new political systems, modern weapons and shifting trade routes made traditional fortified villages less necessary. People moved to new settlements. Old systems of authority weakened. Stone enclosures were abandoned. Vegetation slowly reclaimed the walls. Memories faded. By the early 20th century, many locals viewed the ruins as mysterious relics from an unknown past. Some believed spirits lived there, others avoided the site entirely. It was only later that archaeologists began serious research, realizing that Thimlich Ohinga represented one of the most important examples of traditional stone architecture in sub-Saharan Africa. Today the site is recognized as a World Heritage Monument, symbolizing African innovation, resilience, and historical depth. Yet it remains vulnerable. Weather continues to erode stones. Tourism creates pressure. Urban development threatens nearby areas. Without continued protection, parts of this ancient settlement may disappear. Walking through Thimlich Ohinga now is a quiet and powerful experience. There are no roofs, no voices, no fears, only stone corridors and open skies. But in that silence it is possible to imagine the past. Children playing in courtyards, elders meeting in shaded corners, warriors standing guard at entrances, families gathering at sunset. The stone walls of lost Africans remind us that advanced civilizations existed across Africa long before colonial records began. They built complex societies, they developed engineering knowledge, they created systems of governance and belief, and they did so using local materials, shared labour, and deep cultural wisdom. Thimlich Ohinga stands as proof that African history is not empty or forgotten. It is written in stone, waiting to be read, waiting to be respected, waiting to be understood, inside the lost world of Ouaddaine ruins. Deep in the heart of the Sahara Desert, where endless sand meets rocky plateaus and the horizon seems to stretch forever, there lies a silent stone city that once connected Africa to the wider world through trade, knowledge and culture. This place is known as Ouaddaine, an ancient settlement built on the edge of the Adrar Plateau in Mauritania, where merchants, scholars and travellers once gathered after crossing some of the harshest landscapes on earth. Today Ouaddaine appears abandoned and fragile. Collapsed houses, broken walls, empty streets, stone structures slowly dissolving into dust. But centuries ago, this was a thriving desert city, full of movement, voices, learning and economic power. At first glance the ruins seem scattered and chaotic, as if they were built without planning. Yet, when studied closely, it becomes clear that Ouaddaine was carefully designed to fit its environment. Homes were clustered tightly together to protect against wind and heat. Narrow alleys provided shade. Thick stone walls kept interiors cool during the day and warm at night. Everything was shaped by survival in extreme conditions. Ouaddaine was founded around the 12th century and quickly became an important stop on the trans-Saharan trade routes that linked West Africa to North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Caravans carrying gold, salt, ivory, leather and slaves passed through this region for centuries, and Ouaddaine became one of their most important resting and trading points. Merchants would arrive after weeks of travel across burning sands, exhausted and desperate for water, shelter and safety. Here they found wells, storage houses, markets and protection. The city functioned as both a commercial hub and a cultural bridge between distant civilizations. But Wardain was more than just a trading post. It was also a centre of learning. Scholars lived here. Manuscripts were copied. Religious studies were taught. Libraries were built. Some families preserved handwritten books on astronomy, medicine, law, and theology for generations. These texts connected Wardain to the great intellectual traditions of the Islamic world, stretching from Morocco to Egypt and beyond. Inside simple stone houses, students once studied by oil lamps, discussing philosophy and science while desert winds blew outside. This combination of trade and education made Wardain one of the most respected cities in the Western Sahara. It was part of a network that included famous centres like Timbuktu and Chinguetti, forming a chain of knowledge across the desert. Building and maintaining a city in this environment required extraordinary organisation. Water had to be carefully managed. Food had to be stored. Caravans had to be protected. Supplies had to be rationed. Without discipline and cooperation, life here would have been impossible. The architecture reflects this reality. Buildings were made from local stone and clay, stacked and reinforced to resist erosion. Roofs were flat and practical. Open courtyards allowed airflow. The entire settlement functioned like a living machine designed for desert survival. Wardain was also politically important. Local leaders controlled trade routes, collected taxes, and maintained alliances with nomadic tribes. They negotiated protection for caravans and resolved disputes between merchants. Power here was based not on armies, but on control of knowledge, water, and routes. However, the desert is never stable. Over time, environmental changes altered trade paths. New routes emerged. Old ones declined. European sea trade reduced the importance of land caravans. Colonial interference disrupted traditional systems. Gradually, Wardain lost its central role. As trade declined, wealth disappeared. Scholars left, families moved, houses were abandoned. Without maintenance, buildings collapsed. Sand and wind began to reclaim them. City. By the 20th century, Wardain had become a shadow of its former self. Only a small population remained nearby, while most of the old town stood empty. To outsiders, it looked like just another ruined desert settlement. Few understood its historical importance. Modern researchers later recognized Wardain as a key piece of African and Islamic history. Its ruins preserve evidence of how knowledge and commerce once flowed across continents without modern technology. Today, Wardain is protected as a heritage site, but it remains extremely vulnerable. Wind erosion, temperature extremes, and lack of resources continue to damage structures. Each year more walls collapse, more history is lost. Walking through Wardain now is like stepping into another time. There are no shops, no traffic, no crowds, only stone ruins, open sky, and silence. Yet in that silence, traces of the past remain. The echo of camel bells, the sound of scholars reading, the voices of traders, negotiating, the rhythm of a city that once connected worlds. The forgotten city in Mauritania reminds us that some of the greatest centres of human civilization were built in places most people today would consider unlivable. It shows that knowledge, cooperation, and ambition can transform even the harshest environments into thriving societies. Wardain was not built by kings or empires. It was built by merchants, scholars, and ordinary people who believed in trade, learning, and community. And although its walls are crumbling, its legacy still stands, written in stone, written in manuscripts, written in the memory of the desert, waiting to be rediscovered, waiting to be protected, waiting to be understood. The stone pyramids of Sudan, the hidden power of Meroe pyramids. When people think about pyramids, almost everyone immediately thinks about Egypt. They imagine Giza, pharaohs, and the Nile. Very few people realize that hundreds of pyramids also exist in Sudan, built by an African empire that once controlled trade, politics, and military power across northeast Africa for more than 1,000 years. These pyramids stand at Meroe, in the heart of the Nubian desert, far from modern cities, far from tourist routes, and far from most history books. Yet in ancient times this place was one of the most important centres of power in the region. Meroe was the royal cemetery of the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization that developed south of Egypt and eventually became strong enough to rule Egypt itself for nearly a century. The Kushite kings were not minor rulers. They were emperors. They controlled gold mines, iron production, caravan routes, and river trade. Their territory stretched across what is now Sudan and southern Egypt, linking Central Africa to the Mediterranean world. From this wealth they built cities, temples, and monuments, including these pyramids. When you first see the pyramids of Meroe, They look different from Egyptian pyramids. They are smaller, they are much steeper, they rise sharply from the sand. But this design was not a mistake. It was a local architectural style developed by Kushite engineers, adapted to available materials, climate and religious traditions. Over 200 pyramids were built here between about 300 BCE and 350 CE. Each one marked the burial place of a king, queen or high-ranking noble. Together they formed a sacred city of the dead. Every pyramid at Meroe was part of a complete burial complex. In front of each structure stood a small chapel where priests and family members performed rituals, brought food offerings, burned incense, and prayed for the spirit of the deceased. Below ground level, deep, burial chambers were cut into bedrock, where the body was placed along with jewelry, weapons, furniture, and ceremonial objects. These underground chambers were carefully sealed to protect the dead and their possessions. Building these pyramids in the desert was an enormous challenge. Stone had to be quarried from distant hills. Blocks had to be transported across sand and rock without wheeled vehicles or animals for heavy lifting. Workers laboured under extreme heat. Water had to be brought from the Nile. Food had to be supplied daily. Everything had to be planned. Nothing could be wasted. This tells us that the Kingdom of Kush had strong administration, experienced engineers, and disciplined labour systems. These were not simple tribal societies. They were organised states. The religious beliefs behind the pyramids were complex. Kushite religion blended African traditions with Egyptian spiritual ideas. They worshipped gods like Amun and Isis, but they also followed their own deities, especially Apedamak, the lion-headed god of war and power. They believed that rulers became divine after death and continued to protect the kingdom from the spiritual world. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a gateway between worlds. One of the most important and often ignored facts about Meroe is the role of women in Kushite society. Many of the rulers buried here were queens, known as Kandakees. These women did not rule symbolically. They commanded armies, they negotiated with Rome, they controlled territory, some even defeated foreign invasions. Their pyramids stand equal in size and importance to those of male kings. This shows that political power in Kush was not limited to men. Excavations at Meroe have revealed remarkable objects: gold jewellery, silver ornaments, glass vessels, iron weapons, ceramic art, all showing advanced craftsmanship. Kush was also one of the earliest major iron-producing civilizations in Africa. Its iron industry supplied tools and weapons across large regions. This industrial strength helped maintain military and economic power for centuries, but no civilization lasts forever. By the 4th century CE, the Kingdom of Kush began to weaken. Trade routes shifted, environmental pressures increased, soil fertility declined, conflicts with neighbouring states intensified. Roman and later Aksumite expansion disrupted traditional systems. Gradually, Meroe lost its political and economic importance. The capital was abandoned, the pyramids were left without protection. Over time, many were damaged. Some were looted by treasure hunters. In the 19th century, European explorers even used explosives to break into pyramids searching for gold, destroying irreplaceable history in the process. For a long time, Meroe was treated as a minor copy of Egypt. Its achievements were ignored, its culture was underestimated. Only in recent decades have historians and archaeologists begun to fully recognize Kush as one of Africa's great independent civilizations. Modern research shows that Kush was innovative, technologically advanced, and politically powerful in its own right. Today, the pyramids of Meroe still stand in the desert, but they remain fragile. Wind erodes their stone. Sand buries foundations. Lack of funding limits conservation. Political instability slows research. Every year more details are lost. Walking through Meroe now feels very different from visiting famous sites like Giza. There are no massive crowds, no loud tour buses, no commercial centres, only rows of pyramids under open sky, each one marking a life that once shaped history, each one representing a chapter that was nearly forgotten. These monuments were not built for modern visitors. They were built to preserve memory, to show power, to guarantee immortality. The stone pyramids of Sudan remind us that ancient greatness was not limited to one civilization or one region. Africa produced empires, engineers, rulers, and thinkers long before modern borders existed. Meroe proves that history is far richer and more complex than most people are taught. Hidden in the desert, ignored for centuries, this lost kingdom still speaks through stone, and if we are willing to listen, it still has much to teach us about power, knowledge, and human ambition. The hidden city of Iran, inside the lost civilization of Shahr-e-Sukhteh, in the dry plains of southeastern Iran, near the borders of Afghanistan and Pakistan, there lies a vast ruined city that once supported tens of thousands of people, long before most famous ancient empires had even begun to form. This place is called Shahr-e-Sukhteh, which means the burnt city, and it represents one of the earliest and most advanced urban centres of the ancient world, built more than 5,000 years ago. Today the region looks harsh and lifeless. Dry winds blow across empty land. Water is scarce. Vegetation is limited. But in ancient times this area was very different. Rivers flowed nearby. Fertile land supported farming. Trade routes passed through. And people were able to build a large organised city in the middle of what is now desert. Shahr-e-Sukhteh was founded around 3200 BCE and remained active for more than 1,000 years. During this time it grew into a major centre of population, industry and culture, covering more than 150 hectares at its peak. This was not a small settlement, it was a true city, with neighbourhoods, workshops, storage areas, cemeteries and administrative zones. Archaeological studies show that the city was carefully planned. Residential areas were separated from industrial zones. Workshops for pottery, metalworking and textile production were grouped together. Public spaces were clearly defined. Water channels were built to support daily life. This kind of urban organisation was extremely rare at such an early stage in human history. Excavations have revealed that the people of Shahr-e-Sukhteh were highly skilled craftsmen. They produced fine pottery with complex designs. They wove advanced textiles. They worked with metals and stone. They created jewellery from precious materials. Many of these materials came from distant regions, showing that the city was connected to long-distance trade networks, stretching across Iran, Central Asia, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. Merchants travelled hundreds of kilometres to exchange goods here. One of the most remarkable discoveries at Shahr-e-Sukhteh is evidence of advanced medical knowledge. Archaeologists found the remains of a woman who had an artificial eye made from bitumen and gold, carefully shaped and fitted. This is considered one of the earliest known prosthetic devices in human history. Other skeletons show signs of surgical treatment and healing, suggesting that doctors here understood anatomy and medical care far better than previously believed for this time period. The city also shows signs of early scientific thinking. Researchers have found board games, measurement tools, and complex administrative seals used for trade and record keeping. These objects suggest that people here used systems of calculation, planning, and regulation to manage economic and social life. They were not living randomly, they were managing a structured society. The name Burnt City comes from layers of ash found in different parts of the site. Over its long history, Shahr-e-Sukhteh experienced several major fires. Some may have been caused by accidents in industrial workshops. Others may have resulted from conflict or internal collapse. These fires damaged parts of the city, but in many cases the inhabitants rebuilt and continued living there. This shows strong resilience and social stability. Life in Shahr-e-Sukhteh depended heavily on water management. The city relied on nearby rivers and canals to support farming and daily needs. Engineers built systems to control water flow and reduce flooding. For centuries these systems worked, but over time environmental changes altered river paths and reduced water availability. Drought became more common, farming became harder, resources declined. At the same time, trade routes shifted, other cities became more important. Economic networks weakened, political stability declined. Gradually the city lost its ability to support large populations. Around 1800 BCE, Shahr-e-Sukhteh was abandoned. People left. Buildings collapsed, sand and dust covered streets. The city disappeared from memory. For thousands of years no one knew what had once existed here. It was only in the 20th century that archaeologists rediscovered the site and began systematic excavations. What they found completely changed our understanding of early civilization in this region. They realized that advanced urban life had developed here independently, without direct control from Mesopotamia or Egypt. This was not a copy of another civilization. It was its own original system. Today, Shahr-e-Sukhteh is recognized as one of the most important Bronze Age sites in the Middle East. It shows that innovation, science, medicine, and urban planning existed in Iran much earlier than most people realize. Yet the site remains fragile. Wind. Erosion damages walls. Illegal digging destroys layers. Limited funding slows research. Every year information is lost. Walking through the ruins today, you see only broken mud brick walls and open ground. But beneath that surface lies the memory of a city that once buzzed with activity. Markets, workshops, homes, schools, hospitals, administrative centres, all gone, yet not forgotten. The hidden city of Iran reminds us that human intelligence and creativity developed in many places at once, not just in famous regions. Shari Sukhteh proves that 5,000 years ago, people here were already building complex societies based on cooperation, knowledge, and long-term planning. It stands as evidence that much of human history is still buried under sand, waiting to be understood. And every discovery here brings us closer to understanding how civilization truly began. The stone rings of Namibia, inside the mystery of the Namib Desert. In the vast deserts of Namibia, where some areas have remained dry and untouched for millions of years, there are strange circular formations scattered across the land that continue to confuse scientists, archaeologists, and travelers alike. These formations appear as rings on the desert surface, sometimes surrounded by stones, sometimes marked only by changes in soil and vegetation, stretching across wide areas of the Namib Desert in patterns that seem far too organized to be random. From the ground they look simple, bare patches of earth, circular outlines, occasionally lined with rocks, but when viewed from above they form thousands of repeating shapes spread across kilometers, creating one of the most unusual landscapes on Earth. For decades, researchers have debated whether these circles were created by ancient people, natural forces, insects, or a combination of many different processes working together over time. Some early visitors believed the stone rings were remnants of prehistoric settlements, ritual spaces, or burial markers created by desert communities that lived here thousands of years ago. In many parts of Africa, ancient cultures built stone circles for ceremonies, navigation, and social gatherings, so it was natural to think that similar traditions might have existed here. However, unlike known archaeological stone circles, most of the Namib formations contain no clear tools, bones, or building remains that would directly confirm human construction. This absence of clear evidence has made the mystery even deeper. Modern scientific studies have shown that many of these circles are connected to complex environmental systems involving underground water, plant competition, and termite activity. In some areas, termites remove vegetation from specific zones, changing soil chemistry and water retention. In other areas, plants compete for limited moisture, creating natural circular gaps where nothing grows. Over time, stones are moved and exposed, forming visible rings. This means that at least some of the circles are the result of long-term ecological processes rather than deliberate human design, but this is not the full story. In several locations within the Namib region, archaeologists have also identified genuine stone arrangements that were clearly placed by human hands. These include small circular enclosures, hearth sites, and campsite remains used by early hunter-gatherer groups and later pastoral communities. Some of these sites overlap with natural formations, making it extremely difficult to separate human activity from environmental patterns. This overlap creates confusion. Where does nature end and human influence begin? The desert itself complicates research. Wind constantly shifts sand. Flash floods erase traces. Extreme temperatures break down materials. Organic remains disappear quickly. As a result, much archaeological evidence in the Namib has been destroyed long before modern scientists arrived. We are often left only with stones and patterns, without clear context. Historical records show that indigenous groups such as the San and later pastoral communities travelled through and lived in parts of this desert for thousands of years. They understood water sources, seasonal movements, and animal behaviour in ways modern people rarely imagine. It is possible that some stone rings were used as temporary shelters, livestock enclosures, ritual spaces, or navigation markers. But without written records, these possibilities remain difficult to prove. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Namib stone circles is their scale. Some fields contain thousands of rings spread over huge distances, following subtle changes in soil type and moisture. This suggests that even when nature is responsible, the processes involved operate with remarkable precision and consistency over centuries. It is a reminder that natural systems can create structures that appear almost intelligent in their design. Researchers using satellite imagery, soil analysis, and long-term climate data have found that these circles respond to rainfall patterns and underground water flow. During wet years, some rings shrink. During dry periods, they expand. This shows that the landscape itself is alive, constantly reshaping its surface in response to invisible forces beneath it. At the same time, the presence of nearby ancient campsites, tools, and burial grounds indicates that humans and these natural formations existed side by side for millennia. People adapted their lives to this environment, learning how to survive where water was scarce and temperatures were extreme. They may have used natural clearings as gathering points, resting places, or reference markers during long journeys. Over time, human movement may have reinforced or modified existing circles, blending culture and nature into a single landscape. This makes the Namib stone rings different from most ancient monuments. They are not clearly temples. They are not clearly cities. They are not clearly graves. They exist in a space between human history and natural history. They belong partly to both. Despite decades of study, no single explanation fits every circle. Some are biological, some are geological, some are likely cultural. Many are probably the result of multiple processes acting together over thousands of years. This complexity is what makes them so difficult to classify and so fascinating to study. Today, the Namib Desert remains one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Strong winds, limited rainfall, and intense sunlight continue to reshape the land every year. Many stone circles slowly change or disappear, while new ones form elsewhere. The landscape is never fixed. It is constantly rewriting itself. Walking through these circle fields creates a strange feeling. There are no buildings, no monuments, no signs, only endless sand, distant mountains, and repeating patterns under open sky. Yet those patterns represent thousands of years of interaction between climate, soil, insects, plants, animals, and humans. They are records written without words. The stone rings of Namibia remind us that not all mysteries come from lost cities or forgotten empires. Some come from the deep relationship between people and the environments they inhabit. They show that history is not only stored in walls and artifacts, it is also stored in landscapes, in patterns, in processes that take centuries to unfold. The Namib Desert continues to protect these secrets, and as long as its winds keep moving and its sands keep shifting, the story of these circles will remain unfinished, still debated, still studied, still waiting to be fully understood. The tomb fields of Yemen, inside the ancient world of Al-Hajar, tombs. High in the rugged mountains of Yemen, where steep valleys cut through rocky plateaus and clouds often drift low across isolated villages, there exists a vast field of ancient stone tombs that few people outside the region have ever seen or studied in detail. These tombs, known today as the Al-Hajar burial fields, are scattered across remote highland landscapes, built by communities who lived here thousands of years ago and whose stories were never written down in books or carved into monuments. At first glance, the area looks like ordinary mountain terrain, rocky slopes, dry grass, scattered stones. But as you move closer, the patterns begin to appear. Rows of stone chambers, circular and rectangular graves, carefully stacked walls, small entrance openings, all arranged with clear human intention. These are not random rock formations. They are the remains of organized burial grounds created by ancient societies who invested enormous effort into honoring their dead. Archaeological studies suggest that many of these tombs date back to the Bronze Age and early Iron Age, between roughly 2500 BCE and 500 BCE, a period when southern Arabia was developing complex trade networks and early kingdoms. At this time, Yemen was not isolated. It was a major crossroads between Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. Caravans carrying incense, spices, metals, and luxury goods passed through these mountains on their way to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean. The people who built these tombs lived in small fortified settlements, farmed terraced hillsides, raised livestock, and participated in long-distance trade. Their society was organized around clans and extended families, and ancestors played a central role in maintaining social identity and political authority. Burial grounds like Al-Hajar were not placed randomly. They were built near settlements, on visible slopes and ridges where they could be seen from far away. This placement was deliberate. It allowed the living to remain constantly aware of their ancestors and reinforced the idea that the past, present and future were deeply connected. Each tomb was constructed from locally sourced stone, gathered from nearby hills and shaped by hand. Large slabs formed walls and roofs, smaller stones filled gaps. No mortar was used. Everything depended on balance, experience, and precision. Many of these structures have survived for millennia, proving the skill of their builders. Inside the tombs, archaeologists have found human remains, pottery, beads, metal tools, and ornaments. These objects were placed with care, showing that burial was accompanied by rituals, offerings, and ceremonies. The dead were not simply buried and forgotten. They were remembered, respected, and integrated into community life through repeated visits and traditions. Some tombs were reused over generations. Older remains were rearranged. New burials were added, space was carefully managed. This practice turned each grave into a long-term family archive, recording decades or even centuries of lineage in stone. The size and complexity of tombs also reveal social differences. Some graves are small and simple, others are large, multi-chambered and carefully decorated. This suggests that status, leadership and wealth influenced burial practices. Not everyone was honoured in the same way. Power and influence continued beyond death. Religion played a major role in shaping these traditions. Ancient South Arabian belief systems focused heavily on ancestor worship, fertility, protection, and natural forces. Mountains, storms, and seasonal cycles were seen as sacred. By placing tombs in high, exposed areas, communities may have believed they were bringing the dead closer to spiritual realms. These burial fields also served political purposes. By controlling burial grounds, families and clans claimed land, history, and legitimacy. A group that could point to generations of ancestors buried in one place could justify its right to rule, farm, and defend that territory. In this way, tombs were both spiritual monuments and political tools. Over time, Yemen's political landscape changed. Powerful kingdoms rose and fell, trade routes shifted, new religions spread. Islam transformed burial customs. Old traditions were abandoned. Many ancient cemeteries were forgotten. Some were damaged by construction, others were looted. Many were simply left to erode in silence. Modern conflict and instability have made research extremely difficult. Large areas remain unexplored. Many sites are undocumented. Some have already been destroyed before scientists could study them. As a result, much of Yemen's ancient history remains hidden beneath stone and soil. When archaeologists have been able to work here, they have been amazed by how little is known about these societies compared to their importance in regional history. The tomb fields suggest organized communities, strong leadership, skilled engineering, and deep spiritual traditions. Yet written records are rare. Most of their story must be reconstructed from fragments. Walking through the Al-Hajjah tomb fields today is a powerful experience. There are no fences, no signs, no guides, only stone graves stretching across mountains under open sky. Each one represents a human life, a family, a community, a forgotten chapter of civilization. You begin to realize that Yemen's history did not start with famous kingdoms or medieval cities. It began much earlier, with mountain societies who learned how to survive in difficult terrain and build lasting cultural systems. The tomb fields of Yemen remind us that some of the world's oldest and richest histories exist in places rarely shown on screens or taught in classrooms. They show that advanced societies developed here long before modern borders and politics. Hidden in remote highlands, these stone graves continue to preserve the memory of people who shaped Arabia's early civilization. And until they are fully studied and protected, much of their story will remain buried in silence, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be understood. The stone cities of Burkina Faso, inside the forgotten world of Loropéni ruins. In the green highlands of southwestern Burkina Faso, where seasonal rains turn dry land into farmland, and clouds often gather over low hills, there stands a massive stone complex that represents one of West Africa's greatest and least known ancient achievements. This place is called Loropéni, and it is the largest surviving stone-built settlement in the entire region, constructed by societies who controlled trade, resources and political power long before colonial borders existed. At first glance, the ruins look like broken walls scattered across open land. Large blocks of reddish stone, collapsed gateways, overgrown courtyards, open spaces where buildings once stood. But as you walk through the site, it becomes clear that this was once a carefully planned fortified city, built for defence, administration, and long-term settlement. The walls of Loropéni stretch for more than 1 kilometre, and reach heights of up to 6 metres in some places. They are made from laterite stone, cut from the surrounding earth and stacked without mortar using traditional dry stone techniques. Each block was selected, shaped and placed by hand, creating structures strong enough to survive for centuries of rain, heat and erosion. Archaeological research suggests that Loropéni was built and occupied between about the 11th and 19th centuries, during a period when West Africa was deeply connected through trade networks linking the Sahara, the Niger River basin, and the Atlantic coast. This region was part of the gold-producing zone that supplied powerful empires such as Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Gold, salt, cola nuts, leather, and textiles moved along these routes, and settlements like Loropéni played a key role in controlling and protecting this trade. The people who built Loropéni were likely part of the Lobi and related cultural groups who developed complex systems of governance, defense and land management. They lived in extended family compounds, practiced farming and herding, and maintained strong clan structures. The stone city served as a central place where leaders met, goods were stored, and important decisions were made. Inside the walls, archaeologists have identified remains of houses, storage areas, workshops, and open courtyards. These spaces were organized to support daily life, economic activity, and community gatherings. Food was stored safely behind the walls, valuable goods were protected, families could take shelter during times of conflict. The design reflects a society that expected danger and planned carefully for it. Defense was clearly a major concern. The walls include narrow entrances, controlled passageways, and elevated sections that allowed guards to observe surrounding land. From these positions, inhabitants could monitor approaching traders, visitors, or enemies. In times of attack, the settlement could function as a stronghold protecting both people and resources. Building such a fortress required enormous cooperation. Stones had to be quarried, transported, lifted, fitted, and maintained. Without metal machinery or modern tools, this work depended entirely on human strength, coordination, and experience. It shows that Loropéni society was highly organized and capable of sustaining large construction projects over generations. Religion and spiritual belief also shaped life inside the stone city. Sacred spaces were used for rituals, honoring ancestors, natural forces, and protective spirits. In many West African traditions, ancestors are believed to guide and protect the living. By building permanent stone settlements, communities create physical links between past, present, and future. Loropéni was not just a military centre, it was also a cultural and spiritual anchor. Over time, the region's political and economic systems changed. Trade routes shifted. European coastal trade reduced the importance of inland networks. Firearms altered warfare. Colonial expansion disrupted traditional authority. Gradually, fortified settlements like Loropéni lost their strategic value. People moved to new villages. Old centres were abandoned. Without maintenance, walls collapsed. Vegetation spread. Memory faded. By the 20th century, Loropéni was largely forgotten outside local communities. Many people saw it simply as an old ruin with no known story. It was only through modern archaeological work that its importance was recognised. Researchers realised that it represented a rare example of large-scale stone architecture in West Africa. Today, Loropéni is protected as a World Heritage Site, but it remains vulnerable. Weather continues to weaken walls. Farming and development create pressure. Limited resources slow conservation efforts. Without continued protection, parts of this unique history may disappear. Walking through Loropéni today is a quiet and powerful experience. There are no tall buildings, no crowds, no modern noise, only stone walls, open sky, and distant farmland. Yet every passageway and courtyard reflects a time when this place was alive with activity, merchants arriving with goods, families working in compounds, leaders meeting in courtyards, guards watching the horizon. The stone cities of Burkina Faso remind us that advanced urban societies existed across Africa long before modern nations were formed. They built strong economies, they developed engineering knowledge, they organized political systems, and they protected their communities through cooperation and planning. Loropéni stands as proof that African history is deep, complex, and full of achievements that deserve recognition. Hidden in plain sight for centuries, this stone city continues to tell the story of a people who shaped their world with skill, discipline, and vision. And as long as its walls remain standing, that story is not finished, it is still waiting to be fully heard. Forgotten Pyramids of China, inside the hidden empire of Mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang. When people think about ancient pyramids, they usually imagine Egypt or Sudan. Very few people realize that China also has massive pyramid-shaped tombs hidden beneath soil, trees, and farmland, built for emperors who ruled with absolute power more than 2,000 years ago. The greatest of these is the Mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, located near the modern city of Xi'an in Shanxi province. At first glance, the site does not look dramatic. It appears as a large artificial hill rising gently from flat land, covered with grass, surrounded by fields, blending into the countryside. But this hill is not natural. It is a man-made pyramid, constructed to protect the body and legacy of one of history's most powerful rulers. Qin Shi Huang ruled in the 3rd century BCE and achieved what no one before him had done. He unified dozens of rival kingdoms into a single Chinese state. He standardized writing, currency, laws, measurements, and roads. He built massive defensive walls that later became part of the Great Wall. He created a centralized government that shaped China for centuries. But he was also obsessed with immortality. He feared death. He searched constantly for ways to live forever. This obsession led him to design the most ambitious tomb complex ever built in East Asia. Construction of the mausoleum began when Qin Shi Huang was still a teenager and continued for nearly 40 years. Historical records suggest that more than 700,000 workers were involved at different stages. They quarried stone, moved earth, built tunnels, created chambers, and shaped an entire underground world beneath the surface. This was not just a grave, it was an underground empire. The central burial mound rises more than 50 meters high and covers a huge underground palace. Ancient texts describe rivers of liquid mercury flowing through the tomb, representing China's major waterways. Ceilings decorated with stars and constellations, mechanical traps designed to kill intruders, and treasure chambers filled with rare objects. Modern scientific surveys have confirmed unusually high levels of mercury in the soil around the mound, supporting parts of these ancient descriptions. Surrounding the main tomb is an enormous complex of pits, buildings, roads, and ritual spaces. The most famous discovery here is the terracotta army, thousands of life-size clay soldiers, horses and chariots placed to guard the emperor in the afterlife. Each figure has unique facial features, hairstyles, and armor. They were arranged in military formation, ready for eternal service. But the terracotta army is only a small part of the full sight. Archaeologists have also found bronze birds, acrobats, musicians, officials, and craftsmen, entire miniature palaces, administrative buildings, stables, workshops, everything, needed to run an empire after death. This shows that Qin Shi Huang believed his rule would continue forever, even beyond life. Building this complex required advanced engineering and organization. Workers had to dig deep shafts, reinforce tunnels, control groundwater, prevent collapses. They used rammed earth, timber supports, bronze tools, and precise planning. Logistics were massive. Food had to be supplied, materials transported, labor managed, punishments enforced. Many workers were prisoners or conscripted peasants who never returned home. Some were reportedly buried alive to protect the tomb's secrets. The mausoleum reflects both the brilliance and cruelty of Qin's rule. It represents extraordinary technical achievement, but also extreme human cost. Power here was absolute. The emperor's will was law. Religion and belief played a central role. Ancient Chinese traditions held that rulers became spiritual guardians after death. By building a complete underground world, Qin Shi Huang was preparing to rule eternally. The tomb was designed to mirror the living empire. Every rank, every function, every institution, all reproduced below ground. Despite its importance, the central tomb has never been fully excavated. Chinese authorities have deliberately avoided opening it, fearing damage to fragile materials and loss of information. Past excavations at nearby pits showed that painted surfaces faded quickly when exposed to air. Modern technology is still not advanced enough to safely preserve everything inside. As a result, the main burial chamber remains sealed. Its true contents are still unknown. This makes it one of the greatest unopened tombs in human history. Over time, the Qin dynasty collapsed soon after the emperor's death. Rebellions erupted, the empire fractured, new dynasties rose. Qin's strict system was replaced, but his tomb remained, hidden, protected, ignored. For centuries, farmers worked fields above it without knowing what lay beneath. It was only in the 20th century that large-scale discoveries began. Archaeologists slowly realized the true size of the complex. Today, researchers believe the mausoleum covers more than 50 square kilometers, making it one of the largest burial sites ever created. Yet only a small fraction has been explored. Most remains buried, most secrets untouched. Walking near the site today feels surprisingly quiet. There are museums, paths, tourists, but beyond that, the land looks ordinary. Few people realize they are standing above an underground world built by an emperor who believed he could defeat death itself. The forgotten pyramids of China remind us that monumental architecture is not limited to stone towers and visible monuments. Sometimes the greatest structures are hidden underground, buried deliberately, protected by secrecy, guarded by time. The mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang stands as proof that human ambition can reach astonishing levels. It shows how far a ruler was willing to go to control both life and death. And until the central tomb is finally opened, its deepest mysteries will remain sealed beneath the earth, waiting, watching, preserving the legacy of China's first emperor. The Tomb Hills of Japan, inside the sacred landscape of Mozu Furichi Kofun. In the middle of modern Osaka's expanding suburbs, surrounded by highways, apartment blocks, and busy neighborhoods, there exists a group of enormous ancient burial mounds that quietly dominate the landscape, even though most people pass by them every day without realizing their true significance. These monuments are known as the Mozu Furuichi Kofun, a vast collection of royal tombs built more than 1500 years ago, during a time when Japan was just beginning to form its first centralized state. From the ground, many of these tombs look like ordinary forested hills, covered in trees, surrounded by water, hidden behind fences, blending into the city. But when viewed from the air, their true form becomes clear. Most of them are shaped like giant keyholes, with a square front section connected to a circular rear mound, forming a design found nowhere else in the world. Some of these tombs are so large that they rival the Great Pyramid of Giza in total area. The largest of all, Daisen Kofun, is believed to be the tomb of Emperor Nintoku, one of Japan's early rulers. It stretches nearly 500 meters in length and is surrounded by multiple moats and embankments. It is one of the biggest burial monuments ever built by humans. Construction of the Kofun began around the 3rd century CE and continued for several hundred years. This period is known as the Kofun era, when powerful clan leaders gradually unified different regions of Japan under a single political system. These tombs were built for kings, queens, and elite rulers who controlled land, armies, and resources. They were not symbolic graves, they were statements of power. Building a Kofun required enormous organization. Tons of soil had to be moved, moats had to be dug, stone chambers had to be built, slopes had to be reinforced, water systems had to be controlled. All of this was done without modern machines, using only human labor, wooden tools, and simple engineering methods. Thousands of workers would have been involved in each major tomb project. This shows that early Japanese rulers already possessed strong administrative systems and the ability to mobilize large populations. Inside the mounds, burial chambers were constructed from massive stone slabs. The dead were placed inside wooden coffins and surrounded by valuable goods. Archaeologists have found bronze mirrors, iron weapons, armor, jewelry, and ritual objects in Kofun tombs. These items reveal close connections between Japan, Korea, and China through trade and cultural exchange. They also show that warfare and political authority were central to elite identity. Around many Kofun, clay figures called haniwa were placed on the surface. These figures represented warriors, houses, animals, priests, and everyday people. They served both decorative and spiritual purposes. Many scholars believe haniwa were meant to protect the tomb and guide the spirit of the ruler in the afterlife. They also give us rare visual information about clothing, tools, and social roles in early Japan. Religion and belief were deeply connected to these burial practices. Early Japanese spirituality focused on ancestor worship and the idea that powerful rulers became divine guardians after death. By building massive tombs, communities were honoring their leaders and reinforcing political loyalty. The tomb was not just for the dead, it was a symbol for the living. It reminded everyone who held power. The location of the Mozu Furichi tombs was carefully chosen. They were built near rivers, fertile plains, and major travel routes. From these positions, rulers could control agriculture, trade, and communication. Even in death, they remained at the center of economic and political life. Over time, as Japan's political system changed and Buddhism spread, burial traditions shifted, large kofun stopped being built. New forms of temples and monuments replaced them. The meaning of the tomb hills gradually faded from everyday awareness. Some were damaged, some were reused, some were simply ignored. Today, most of the major kofun are protected and considered sacred. Many are officially designated as imperial tombs and cannot be excavated. Archaeologists are not allowed to open them, which means much of their internal structure and contents remain unknown. Modern research relies on ground-penetrating radar, aerial surveys, and historical records. As a result, many secrets are still buried. Despite being located in one of Japan's most urbanized regions, the Mozu Furuichi tombs remain islands of silence and greenery. Traffic moves around them, buildings rise nearby, life continues. But inside the moats and trees, time feels frozen. These mounds preserve the memory of a period when Japan was transforming from scattered tribes into a unified state. They show how political authority, religion, and engineering developed together. They reveal how rulers used monument building to shape identity and loyalty. and they demonstrate that large-scale construction was possible in Japan long before medieval castles and temples appeared. The tomb hills of Japan remind us that history does not always stand in obvious ruins. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, disguised as parks, disguised as forests, disguised as hills. Beneath those trees and soil lie stories of ambition, belief, and power that shaped an entire nation. The Mozu-Forichi coffin are not just graves, they are landscapes of memory, written in earth, protected by tradition, and still holding secrets that future generations may one day uncover.